37 million people. The death toll of a century of natural disasters, equal to losing the entire state of California. For most of our life on Earth, we've had to take whatever nature dished out. Not anymore. Around the world, engineers are building a new future. A tower to ride out a catastrophic earthquake. A wall to hold back a raging river. A reservoir to contain an entire typhoon. And a project to save all 6 billion people on Earth. A $190 million silver bullet aimed at an asteroid barreling straight toward us. It's your future. This is how to survive it. Without water, life on Earth wouldn't exist. But water can also be deadly. Just 2 inches of storm water discharged over a square mile can be as devastating as 3 atomic bombs. A lesson drilled into all Americans by Hurricane Katrina. But New Orleans is just one of hundreds of coastal cities at risk. In the last century, sea levels have risen more than a foot, and almost 2/5 of the world's population lives within 60 miles of the ocean. Among those in jeopardy are the 7 million citizens of London, threatened by a powerful tidal river. To protect them, an engineering marvel that took more than 8 years to build. It costs the equivalent of $2.5 billion today, and it's London's lifeline. This is the Thames Barrier, a wall of steel when disaster looms. It defends the British capital from the huge surge tides that drive billions of gallons of water up the River Thames, straight for the heart of the city.
I don't think people do realise exactly how much power the Thames has, how much water flows through it, and how dangerous it is. It's massive. It'll suck you under. You might not come up for miles.
Sarah Adcock is a rock climber, one of the first women to scale the notoriously deadly north face of the Eiger. She has one of the world's riskiest jobs, carrying out vital maintenance on the barrier.
Got these safety ropes rigged. I know what I'm doing. I'm used to heights. I'm used to edges.
She uses her mountaineering skills to reach parts of the structure no one else can, installing underwater machinery that cleans the gates and prevents them from silting up.
Every now and then, when you see the sort of Thames bubbling and boiling underneath you, it can have a few scary moments. It's a very dangerous river.
The barrier is designed to hold back 90,000 tons of water pressure, generated by freak high tides that force their way up the estuary.
It's really good to know that the job I'm doing is helping to prevent this massive catastrophe from happening to London.
Without this shield, London would be defenseless. Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey, St. Paul's Cathedral, all could flood. The 31st of January 1953, the day that showed Londoners just how vulnerable they were.
The 1953 flood event was a wake-up call. It was the worst tidal flooding ever seen in the UK, and that was really the trigger to start building a Thames barrier.
Huge swathes of the southeast of England flooded. 24,000 homes were damaged or destroyed. More than 300 people died. The flooding reached all the way to the London Docklands. Central London was spared only when flood defences gave way downstream. To prevent another disaster, London needed a radical solution.
It was the first of its kind to be built, so not only a massive scale construction project, but also a cutting edge construction project.
Nine reinforced concrete piers form the backbone of the barrier. The largest piers are taller than a 5-story building. The piers are connected by 2 underwater tunnels. Between them, they support 10 mammoth steel gates, the heaviest weighing more than 3,000 tons. Normally, the gates remain flush with the riverbed, but in an emergency, they can be raised in 15 minutes. The gates are tested every month. Any flaw is immediately dealt with by specialists like Sarah Adcock.
It's a huge job, and the Thames Barrier is a massive structure. You have to always be on the ball. Walking along the gate edge is really slippery, so combine those all together and it actually makes it quite sort of physical actually, yeah.
Inside, the gates are stripped of sediment that would keep them from swinging into action. Any weakness would be fatal. Every month, one of the hollow gates is put out of action, allowing mechanics and welders to ensure the barrier is in perfect mechanical order. The surfaces of the gates are made of steel panels 2 inches thick, but if a single weld fails and knocks out one of the sectors, London would be helpless. The hydraulic rams that drive the gates are built into the piers just above the high water mark to ensure they're not damaged even if the Thames breaches the system. Above ground, Sarah and her colleagues rig an elaborate network of ropes and pulleys. The only way key parts of the gates and piers can be accessed and overhauled.
I get a thrill from the challenge of having to maintain something which has to work every time it's called upon to be used. You know you can't fail. The barrier has to work to protect the capital city.
Since completion in 1983, the barrier has been closed more than 90 times to protect London from surge tides. But the real source of danger lies not in the waters of the Thames, but thousands of miles away in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. A 1,000 miles from London, the forces of nature conspire to produce a giant storm and create what's known as the Mid-Atlantic Bulge. The arrival of storm clouds is the first step in a chain of events that threatens the British capital. With the clouds comes an intense low-pressure trough. It acts like a giant vacuum cleaner, sucking up a vast body of water as much as 1,000 miles across. Air pressure plummets. For every inch the mercury drops, the bulge rises another foot.
People have estimated the volume of the bulge, and you're looking at massive amounts, massive orders of magnitude of water.
If the bulge remains in the Atlantic, it's harmless. It takes another natural force to push it toward London.
Wind is also important, and so a wind from the north driving a lot of water down the North Sea also increased the tide level heights quite dramatically over what we would normally experience.
If strong winds blow from the north, they force the bulge down the coast, squeezing it into the English Channel and up the Thames estuary. As the river becomes narrower and shallower, the tide picks up speed, turning the Thames into a liquid battering ram.
The worst case scenario, the 1 in 1,000-year flood tide, would flood 200 square miles of the most densely populated capital city in Europe, covering the Houses of Parliament, the Tower of London, massive numbers of monuments and ancient buildings. The London Underground network would also be flooded. It'd be a massive devastation to the UK.
Since its founding in Roman times, London has always been vulnerable to flooding. The river brought wealth to the city. But as London grew, it squeezed the Thames into a narrower channel. The result? The river rose, and so did the danger of floods. Unchecked, the Thames could devastate one of the financial capitals of the world. New developments along its banks mean more people than ever live at the mercy of the river. The Thames Barrier is designed to withstand the immense force of the so-called 1,000-year event and save the capital. The gates are London's only line of defense.
The gates are extremely solid. Yeah, I've seen the welders working on it and taking pieces out to test, and it's amazing how thick the steel is. It's absolutely solid, massive chunkiness.
As soon as an emergency is declared, the team scrambles.
Okay, John, will do.
A string of early warning stations around the coast gives them up to 12 hours notice of a tidal surge. Powerful hydraulic rams force the gates up through a 90-degree arc to form a metal wall 18 feet thick.
If this gate isn't operational, I mean, that's London flooding, basically.
The crew take on a different purpose to their normal day job where they're maintaining the structure. They know that it has to work. There's a massive amount of adrenaline and energy flowing through the site because it has to go to the closed position to protect the millions of people who live within its protected zone.
This is a test closure, but it's a vital drill for the day when the barrier will have to withstand the killer tides produced by the 1,000-year event. The barrier is designed to protect London until the year 2030. By then, global warming could raise sea levels so high, not even the barrier could save London. And some experts argue climate change is behind more than rising oceans. They say it's spawning another deadly menace, requiring another futuristic solution. The more people you pack into a city, the bigger the target for Mother Nature. 3/4 of Japan is covered in mountains. 90% of its population lives in densely packed cities like Tokyo. 12 million people, $3.3 trillion of property. vulnerable to a killer bred by the warm waters of the Pacific. Typhoons can generate 180-mile-an-hour winds and hold more than 2 billion gallons of water. As global warming raises ocean temperatures, some experts predict even bigger typhoons. Tokyo lies right in their path.
Last September, we had massive flooding. Every year, the typhoon season causes chaos. The entire transport network can break down. The whole of the city is at risk.
Reporter Yusuke Nakano covered the major storm in 2005.
Whole neighborhoods were flooded. I was reporting on the disaster surrounded by water. The flooding caused the drains to burst and there was sewage and filth everywhere. Cars were swept away, people too. Some were trapped in their houses. They couldn't escape. It was a terrible scene.
The Pacific Ocean breeds the most powerful storms on Earth, stronger than anything the Atlantic can produce, and more of them, an average of 23 typhoons a year. In the last 10 years, they've killed almost 600 people. From day one, Tokyo has accepted typhoons as a hazard of life, inevitable and unstoppable.
I grew up seeing pictures of Tokyo flooding on TV, terrible news reports about houses being swept away. The home I grew up in was near a river, and the authorities were always warning us about how dangerous typhoons were and what we should do in an emergency.
Nobu Sakashita and her son are on their way to view a project as spectacular as it is unknown, one that could save their lives.
I've heard a little about this amazing piece of underground engineering, and I really want to see it, because it will protect Tokyo, and I love my city. It's important it's not just the scientists and experts who know about these things.
This is their destination. It may look unremarkable, but don't be fooled. Here at the very edge of the city stands the entrance to one of Tokyo's most dramatic secrets. An engineering marvel built to confine the deadly power of a typhoon. It's a wonder like no other in the world. Welcome to the Edogawa River Project. So spectacular, it has become Tokyo's latest tourist attraction. But it's also the city's salvation. A sprawling man-made underground river system built to protect Tokyo and its suburbs from the ravages of typhoon floods. The heart of the system is buried more than 160 feet underground. When the typhoons come, this chamber turns into an enormous reservoir. Together with the tunnels that feed it, it can hold 91 million gallons of water. Enough to fill 138 Olympic swimming pools.
I had no idea what to expect when we came down the stairs. I was really surprised when we turned the corner and saw this huge space opening out in front of me.
Tadashi Tsutsugi is one of the engineers who conceived this modern wonder.
I was involved in designing the very first models for this project. They were tiny compared to how vast this chamber is. Standing here and looking at it, I feel very proud to have been involved in its design because it does such an important job protecting the city and its surroundings.
Japan has a long history of pioneering new ways to tame floodwater. And this, the latest example, used more than 1.3 million tons of concrete. Only a massive undertaking could hold back the waters from violent storms like typhoons. The main chamber lies beneath Tokyo's eastern suburbs. From it radiate more than 4 miles of tunnels, driven through bedrock 160 feet underground. The tunnels link the Nakagawa Basin, 4 rivers that flow through northeastern Tokyo, to this enormous reservoir.
It took over 10 years to build this facility. It has to be so big to contain the huge amounts of water we get during the typhoon season.
The tunnels are more than 30 feet across. They're fed by 5 huge shafts spaced across the edge of the city that drain excess water from surrounding rivers. The largest shafts, like this one, are more than 200 feet deep and big enough to hold the Statue of Liberty and the Space Shuttle together. When a typhoon hits, it dumps millions of gallons on Tokyo in a matter of minutes. For centuries, the same outcome. Tokyo's rivers swelled and burst their banks.
The floods have been awful in the past. The land here is flat and the water spreads quickly. It can't drain back into the soil because there's been so much new construction here in the last 50 years and most of the fields have been concreted over. But I believe that now we have a solution to this dreadful problem.
When a typhoon sweeps in from the Pacific and the rivers swell, they now drain into the Edogawa River project. As it enters the drainage shafts, water picks up speed, pressure builds, and gravity drives it through the tunnels. When the tunnels are full, the water is forced up through this shaft. It enters the 580-foot-long main chamber, which holds more than 90 million gallons.
The main chamber is a bit like a massive storage tank. We let the floodwater build up here where we can control it, and only pump it out when it is safe to do so.
Once the main chamber is full, the control room switches on 4 enormous 14,000 horsepower pumps driven by jet engines. This is the nerve center of the operation. From here, they monitor every aspect of the system and ensure that water never reaches critical levels at any of the inlets from the rivers. They regulate the flow of liquid through all 4 miles of tunnels and into the main chamber. And from the chamber, the pumps suck 200 tons of water a second. It flows through a final tunnel into one of Tokyo's biggest rivers, the mighty Edogawa. The Edogawa is big enough to channel this vast influx safely out to sea. Since 2002, the pumps have been used more than 30 times to protect Tokyo and its citizens.
The thing is, you never know when it will rain or when the next typhoon will hit, but you know it's only a matter of time. I'm going to tell my friends about this place so they feel a little safer when the next typhoon comes. When you're trying to overcome nature, you have to build enormous places like this. It doesn't matter how much they cost if they're going to save people's lives.
In my job, I cover all sorts of emergencies, and it is always sad to hear of people suffering or dying in natural disasters. So I am happy to know that something has been done to defend us against typhoons and flooding.
But rivers and oceans aren't the only threats to the world we've built. On land, powerful forces are at work that can rip apart the ground beneath our feet. We can't stop them, we can't contain them, but at last, we can defy them. Around the globe, earthquakes kill an average of more than 18,000 people every year. More than 380 major cities lie perilously close to seismic fault zones. Mexico City is one of them. A city so huge that if you need to get somewhere fast and you've got the money, this is how you do it. The express route to the Torre Mayor, the tallest building in Latin America. "57 stories of glass, steel, and concrete. A tower that redefined the skyline for 18 million people. These are two of the men who helped create the city's new icon.
Coming in on the top of the tallest building in Latin America, it's probably the equivalent of a mountain climber arriving on Mount Everest.
Well, Torre Mayor is part of myself. For me, Torre Mayor is the project that I had to be in.
But it's a building that really shouldn't be here. Mexico has more earthquakes than almost anywhere in the world.
People said from the beginning that building a building of this size and height was really an act of folly.
On average, every day Mexico is hit by 14 earthquakes, measuring 3 or more on the Richter scale. Many release more power than 1,000 tons of TNT. A big quake could turn a building this size into a high-tech coffin for the 3,000 people who work here, showering tons of concrete and glass onto the street below.
Mayor absolutely demonstrates the human capacity to overcome great challenges put forth by nature.
The first challenge was the ground itself. Mexico City is built on the soft, muddy soil of a drained lake bed. The Torre stands dead center in the danger zone. Its foundations have been driven through some of the loosest and least stable earth in the city.
Considering the weight of the building, the mud of the soil compacts very easily. So we had to build the building with a very deep foundation to avoid any sinkage.
To root the foundation in solid bedrock, engineers drilled down more than 130 feet, nearly 3 times as deep as the foundations of the Empire State Building. They knew what happened to buildings with weak foundations, and to the people who live in them.
I was living in Mexico City back in 1985 when the big earthquake happened. It was really terrible because many people died. I went out to the street and people running around. The impact on the people was very deep in their heart.
The earthquake's epicenter was more than 200 miles away, towards Acapulco on Mexico's Pacific coast. But the soft soil beneath Mexico City amplified the seismic waves. When the quake arrived, whole neighborhoods collapsed.
It was an enormous earthquake. I mean, nobody could have imagined the impact. It was so intense that you could hear the windows cracking, you know, all the glass cracking.
The quake was one of the biggest in history, 8.1 on the Richter scale. More than 9,000 people perished.
When you walk the streets, you could see how many buildings collapsed. And you saw the whole center of the city completely destroyed. The people came out to the streets and started, you know, with their bare hands to assist brick by brick to rescue people who were still alive.
100,000 people were left homeless. Total damage, more than $4 billion.
It was 21 years ago, but still, you know, you can feel the effect of that. Whenever a little earthquake strikes, then everybody, you know, it's kind of afraid and concerned.
The challenge facing the engineers of the Torre Mayor: build a gleaming $250 million skyscraper where hundreds of other buildings collapsed. In one of the world's most active seismic zones stands Latin America's tallest building. To keep it standing, the Torre Mayor contains almost 20,000 tons of steel, more than double the amount in the Eiffel Tower. But what really helps the tower ride out a quake is a unique piece of engineering. Behind more than 175,000 square feet of glass extends a network of super diagonal diamond bracing, the strongest possible skeleton. Where the superdiagonals overlap, they form 3 smaller diamonds. At each junction, a system so innovative, it's patented. 4 huge shock absorbers.
They look and operate just like a regular shock absorber in your car. The only difference is that they're about the size of your car.
Along with 12 giant dampers on the north and south faces, 74 smaller units run through the central core. The moment a seismic wave strikes the tower, giant pistons inside the shock absorbers are forced inward. They compress silicon fluid and ram it through small holes in the piston head and into a second chamber. The whole process generates huge amounts of heat that dissipates the awesome power of an earthquake. Instead of crashing to the ground, the tower flexes safely.
I think Torre Mayor is a benchmark. Everybody would like to build buildings as important, as safe as Torre Mayor is today.
The Torre Mayor has already been put to the test. Just as it opened in January 2003, it was struck by a magnitude 7.6 earthquake.
A magnitude 7 earthquake is no small event anywhere in the world, but especially in an earthquake-prone part of the world like Mexico is. I was in my office on the 32nd floor. You could see light fixtures moving, plants moving, that sort of thing. At that level, we could actually hear the sound of the shock absorbers, of the seismic devices doing their thing, if you will, actually contracting in order to keep the building in its vertical configuration. And then it was all over as far as we were concerned.
Immediately, Torre Mayor team went to inspect the building, all the machine rooms, all the dampers, all the structure, the walls, and everything. It took us 20 minutes to inspect the whole building and notify everybody that the building was safe and secure. I would rather be in Torre Mayor than anywhere else in the city whenever there's an earthquake.
But the Great Quake of 1985 measured 8.1 on the Richter scale. That's 5 times more powerful than anything the Torre has yet faced. The real test is yet to come.
You can never tame that force. All you can do is adapt around it. And I think we've overcome what the impact, what the effects of nature will be when it occurs the next time. And of course it will happen again.
Earthquakes are the most powerful force on the planet, yet a far graver threat looms. It's almost 300 million miles away, but getting closer by the day. Deep in space, the apocalypse is hurtling toward Earth. Killer asteroids that could wipe out all human life. The Mount Lemmon Observatory in Arizona is mankind's first line of defense. Steve Larson is a neo-hunter, a scientist who scans the heavens for near-Earth objects.
What we're trying to do is trying to quantify the danger. We don't know what the danger is, really. We're trying to find out.
Every day, about 100 tons of material from space rains down on Earth. Most of it is fine dust that burns up in the atmosphere. But Steve Larson looks for objects so large, the atmosphere is no defense.
What we're doing is not science fiction. It's been documented that impacts on the Earth in the past have had major effects on the evolution of life.
The Earth's crust is scarred with asteroid craters. A collision 65 million years ago is thought to have changed the course of evolution. An asteroid 6 miles across slammed into the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. It threw so much debris into the atmosphere, it blocked out the sun and wiped out the dinosaurs. Other impacts have killed more than 90% of all the species that ever lived on Earth. Now we too face disaster.
It would be irresponsible not to look for these things now that we have the technology to do it, because it would be very embarrassing to be hit by one of these objects when we could have done something about it.
The U.S. Congress takes asteroids so seriously, it established a network of observatories to monitor the skies. The team at Mount Lemmon uses a 60-inch telescope, 2 million times more powerful than the human eye. They found over 40% of the more than 4,000 near-Earth objects detected to date. Many are only 3,000 feet across or less, but they still pack a mighty punch.
Even some of the smaller objects that we're observing would, on impact, release more energy than all of our atomic bombs that we know that we have. It would dwarf that kind of energy level.
And this fear became a reality when a NEO was found on a potential collision course with Earth. In June 2004, an observatory near Mount Lemmon in Arizona made a shocking discovery. A near-Earth object 300 million miles away, but heading straight towards us.